right, live. Welcome to the Framework Podcast. My name is David Waselkow. This is Tyler Burr. We are your co-hosts for this. Long time coming.
Here we go.
Here we go.
5 years, I think.
5 years. Has it been 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, long time coming. All right. So I thought we would start by talking about how we arrived here together, you and I. Then from there, why we decided that we thought this was going to be a good idea, the podcast.
Okay.
And then talk about why we think people want to tune in. So
I like it.
So for me, I'm a licensed therapist, licensed professional counselor, and I also work as a consultant, relationship management consultant for a bunch of different relationship type of things, individual, group, team, whatever, institutional. In one way or another, I've been studying and trying to understand conflict for over 30 years. As you know, or maybe you don't know, starting out in foreign policy analysis and international relations and trying to understand why nations go to war and why terrorist groups do what they do and national security, stuff like that. And then oddly moving into psychotherapy, where it's just systems level analysis and looking at conflict and looking at relationships and why that occurs and how you mitigate it. How do you resolve it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what brought me to all this. It's all about trying to understand. Initially, it was trying to understand war. Now it's the war that we have inside of ourselves, or the war that we have with food or our romantic partners or with our career, whatever it is. It's all relationship and conflict.
Yeah.
What brought you to us, at least initially?
What brought me to your couch or room was I got married at 21 and was married 17 years. And there came a point where I was really just questioning what am I going to do with this relationship? This wonderful woman, great mother, will never say a negative word about her at all. But our relationship came to a point where I was really starting to question, what am I going to do? Is this something that, with more work, with more therapy, with more something, is this something that is better for us to stay in, or is it better to sort of part ways? And
right.
So that's really what brought me to you is really that questioning of that.
Right. And immediately, to your credit, I mean, the way you were thinking about how to manage that wasn't just exiting that relationship, but then redefining the relationship so that you could do a post-divorce relationship management too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then you and I, in our work together, this really great, amazing friendship emerges from the work that we're doing. A lot of relationship consulting in a lot of different areas there. We decide that we got to do this podcast, but it was you who was on me like white on rice about this becoming a podcast, especially the rule framework and stuff.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I think that one, being in education and sort of spending a lot of my time creating content and things, we had so many conversations that I wish I could have recorded and gone back and revisited and watched, from not only just a mind-blowing aspect of learning so much, but it was enjoyable, it was fun, and it was the relationship that put me on a waiting list with you, right? And I feel like what I was hoping to get out of the consulting work that we did together, I just wanted to capture it and share it, and because I think that dynamic is somewhat rare.
Yes.
When you think about consulting or therapy or any type of self-help sort of relationships like that, and a lot of times I think it's pretty one-sided, pretty boring. Tell me how you feel. Tell me, some of that bullshit. And it was just so different that I thought I wish I had it captured.
I love that. Yeah, I wish I did too, because those conversations were so engaging, and the relationship that we developed, I was learning just as much from you as you were learning in our work together. And what we came up with is just something that we really feel and think, more importantly, that so many people can benefit from, precisely because it's not all about, well, how does that make you feel?
Mhm.
It's about application. It's about thinking about all these things in a different way with a framework and an ability to navigate through. And that relationship that we've built over time, I think, is exactly why we want to do this podcast and bring it to
Yeah,
people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So why are you here? Probably a lot of different reasons. We think you're likely here because you're suffering, because you're in conflict, because there's a relationship in your life that is wonky. So when we talk about relationship, a lot of times people initially think romantic relationship between partners, and certainly that's one of the things that we will talk about. But the truth is, relationship is everything. Your relationship with yourself, with your partner, with your work, with things like food or exercise or drinking or drugs, whatever it is, smoking, um, relationship to community, relationship to the world. And so when we have conflict in any of those relationships, we struggle, we have suffering. And I think a lot of times when people are struggling with psychological, psychiatric problems, depression, anxiety, certainly stress, it's because of environmental disturbances in those relationships. When people struggle with self-esteem, it's because the rules that govern the relationship they have about food or about exercise or about substances are wonky, and they're in conflict in that relationship. So what we do is we talk about something called the rules framework, so that we can understand the nature of conflict and remember that conflict is no more and no less than a rule dispute. And we'll talk about what rules means here in a little bit, but it's a rule dispute. And that's huge, because the moment you understand that is the moment you're empowered to be able to resolve conflict, to prevent conflict, to manage conflict, and therefore improve your relationships, whether it is with your romantic partner, with colleagues, with the concept you have of your own career, with your workouts, your training, whatever it is. It's all about the rules. Relationships are all about the rules. Conflicts are all about disputes regarding those rules. When we learn that, and we can identify the rule or the rules that are in play and the form of that rule dispute, we are now empowered to not run away from conflict and avoid it, but rather to lean right into it and be able to do something about it.
Yeah. It took me a minute to get over the word rule, to be honest with you. When you first started throwing that word at me and things like, oh God, here we go, more rules. Because for me, I was coming out of a very, very religious situation,
Right.
very, very deep in that, which, God knows there's lots of rules there. So when you really gave me the real understanding of what you mean with that, not only put my mind at ease, but it really clarified things that I had no idea about.
It's so important that you mention that, because words matter. Definitions matter. So let's talk about our definition of the word rules. Most people do react negatively in the beginning when I talk about it's all about the rules, because people think that rules means restrictions. And that's not the definition that I use. That's not the definition we're using. Our rules are our values, needs, wants, desires, fantasies, preferences. Those are our rules. And so when we're in a relationship with a person or a concept, and we talk about rules being broken, rules being violated, what we're really talking about is our values, needs, wants, desires, fantasies, preferences. And rules don't have to be negative in other situations either, meaning golf is organized by rules, right? Or traffic organized by rules. And when we know what the rules are, we know how to navigate. When there's a dispute in those rules, we have conflict, and we have to be able to navigate that conflict as well. So when we talk about rules, it's not about you being restricted. It's actually the reverse. It's about you being empowered. And in order to do relationship with others, we got to do relationship with self. We have to have that self-awareness piece to leverage into relationship awareness. So you started learning about your own rules, and many of them were not known to you, but others were. And a lot of those rules came from other people and from other places, but they didn't jive with your own values.
Well, and I also had the scenario where it wasn't okay, or I didn't feel like it was okay for me to have positive, healthy rules.
Right.
Right. There was always a lot of conversations about less of yourself. Sort of there's this like suffering and a lot of this put your needs last.
Mm-hmm.
All these kinds of things, and so when you first started talking about these positive rules, that things that you want, like need, desires, fantasies, things like what? Wait, let's start there, okay? But let's take a step back, and you tell me that's okay.
Yeah, right.
Because right, that would sounds pretty basic, but that was one of the first pretty mind blowing things I learned.
Yeah, in so much of this sounds basic, but it's actually really elegant in its philosophical underpinnings and its origins.
Mhm.
You were playing by rules written by other people that were inconsistent with your values. And so one of the most important things right from the very beginning in understanding rules is that it could come from all different types of sources, our family of origin, and all the different agents of socialization, whether it's teachers, coaches, church, or clergy, previous relationships, shit we read on Google or see on TikTok or whatever. All of those things, this mosaic of things comes together to form those rules. And those rules govern the system that we're in. So every relationship exists in a system. If we're talking about a marriage, it's a marital system, or a family, it's a family system. And the rules that govern patterns of interaction and patterns of communication affect the occupants of that system. So if you're raised or socialized in a very religious orientation where there's a tremendous amount of rules, and those rules are sort of grandfathered into the marriage relationship, then they're exuding an influence upon the occupants of the system, you and your partner, for example. Well, if those rules are either inconsistent with our own values or they're not even known to us, right then and there, we've got a rule dispute, we've got conflict. And so, a very important first step in all of this is taking an inventory of all the rules in our system and making decisions about whether or not we want to keep those rules or get rid of them or write new ones or modify them. But from a place of self-esteem and a place of congruence, if our rules are not authored by us or endorsed by us, that's the beginning recipe of conflict. Yeah.
Well, and a lot in my case, right? I mean, a lot of that was internal conflict because my relationship with my rules was just off, in conflict, whatever you want to call it, inconsistent, and very, very difficult. And that's a tricky fucking place to live, right?
It's absolutely tricky because it's the place where we build up guilt and shame and confusion and anger, frustration, right? All those negative feelings that we then say, well, this is why we're depressed or this is why we're anxious. And we say, yeah, I get it. But let's think about the why behind that. It's because there's an incongruence between these rules that we think we're supposed to be following or adhering to and what our own rules really are. And then when you add another person in that relationship dynamic and they bring all of their rules, some of those rules are known to them and not to us. Some of those rules are known to us and not to them. Some of those rules are not known to either, yet nonetheless they exude an influence upon the relational system. So, as the architects of all of our own relationships, it starts by understanding what are the rules, and are those rules ours, or are they written by other people and for other purposes?
Yeah. And I didn't even, to be honest, the only, if you would have asked me what my rules were at the time when you and I met, I would have told you the one that I'm focused on the most is not being like my father. Right. So when you started getting into prohibitive thinking and affirmative thinking and things, again, just an entirely new way to look at everything that was going on in my head and what I was processing through. Because all I knew is what I didn't want to be. I wasn't even thinking about what makes me happy, what fulfills me, what brings me joy and happiness and things. It was just I just knew what I didn't want to be, which is a fucking pickle.
It is the ultimate pickle, right? And it's a perfect transition because the nature of our thinking is the thing that produces and writes the rules in the first place. So if prohibitive thinking is driving the rules that we're adhering to or that we're writing, it's like fruit from the poisonous tree. That fear persists and the suffering persists. So we should talk about that thinking tool because it's essential to our framework. So the rule framework, we'll get to all the details and the nuts and bolts of that, but there's some things that are antecedent to that occur before that are so important, and you just nailed one. So very early on, before we're even consciously aware, we have a choice between prohibitive thinking and affirmative thinking. Prohibitive thinking begins with the internal dialogue, I don't want to, I'm afraid of, like you were talking about. I don't want to be my dad. Whereas affirmative thinking begins with an internal dialogue that says, I aspire to, or I want to. And it's very important for you guys listening to this, new learners here. We are not talking about the power of positive thinking at all. We're talking about selecting an area of focus that exists in reality and that is solution focused. There's a huge difference between those two. And I'll explain why. A person who says, I don't want to be my father. Do you remember what I said to you when you said that?
You're like, well, how the hell do you know if you've made it?
Right.
When is that ever accomplished?
Right. So a person says, I don't want to become my father. I say, okay, how do you know when you're ever successful at not becoming something? Mm-hmm. And the person thinks about it for a while, like you did, and you realize, oh my gosh, I never know. You could go your whole life trying not to be something and never know if you were successful in accomplishing that. So that's an anti-goal. It's a goal without end. And it actually makes us exit reality because we think that we can accomplish something or measure something that can't be done. It's an anti-goal. It's a goal without end. Whereas on the affirmative side, if we say, I aspire to be something else, that's doable. That's measurable. So if a person doesn't want to be their mother or father, let's say because their father or mother was a doormat. Okay. We acknowledge why the prohibitive thought is there, right? But then we take the very important second step and intentionally go to the affirmative side and say, I aspire to be more assertive. Now, notice the difference cognitively, thinking, between I don't want to be my father and I aspire to be more assertive. They could not be more different. And the reason why that matters is because where the mind goes, the ass follows, meaning our thinking influences our behavior, which in turn affects how we feel. But if you aspire to be more assertive, well, that's doable, that's measurable, and that's actually solution oriented. It's in reality. The other example we use about prohibitive affirmative thinking is, you think about a hypothetical person, we'll call him John, the problem drinker, right? John says, I don't want to drink today. I'm afraid of drinking, so I'm not going to drink today. And everybody around him says, oh, good for you, John, you're doing the right things and saying the right things. And we're the only two people in the room who are going like this, because you and I both know when John says, I don't want to think about drinking today, what's he thinking about?
Yep. Drinking the whole time.
Drinking. So his entire enterprise, its solution is to focus on the problem.
Yep.
Whereas if John says, today I want to drink lemonade, well, now we've got something that's doable, that's measurable. And notice, what does drinking lemonade have to do with drinking alcohol? Nothing. That tells us that the solution doesn't even have to have anything to do with the problem. That's important. So affirmative thinking is crucial, because if we start making proposals about rules, or if we're writing rules, or we're adhering to rules that originate from prohibitive thinking, we're screwed right from the very beginning. Kind of like you were talking about with your dad and with your experiences in religion.
For sure. Yeah. And for me, right, I mean, the big thing, so my folks split when I was 6. My dad had a couple of affairs, and they, and then he was completely not present for most of my life, still isn't. So that was my whole thing of processing a divorce. Like, oh shit, I don't want to be this guy.
Right.
But being able to say, or I could go through a divorce and be a present father, be a better father.
Right.
I could go through a divorce and have a healthy relationship with my ex. I can go, right. I can do all of these things and come out very, very still don't do. I can still avoid the things he, but knowing what it is I was actually accomplishing, or it gave me the intentionality to do all of the right things.
100%. And there it is, the intentionality. Because the only thing in the known universe that we can control is the area of focus that we select. So if we select as our area of focus prohibitive thinking, we just committed to an anti-goal, a goal without end. And we never know if we ever got there. And the stress and the self-scrutiny and all the things that come from that, they stay with us the entire time. Whereas if you're intentional and you acknowledge the prohibitive thought, I mean, it's real, right? We're not pretending that it's not there. But after we acknowledge it, we're intentionally moving that thought to the affirmative side and say, okay, I aspire to be the kind of person who is faithful in my relationships. I aspire to have a healthy divorce process and negotiate a post-divorce relationship with my ex. I aspire to be a present and engaged father. The difference between that thinking and I don't want to be my father could not be bigger. And that's everything, right? Because with that area of focus, where the mind goes, the ass follows. Now you're doing things affirmatively that are consistent with your values. This is what I want. This is who I am. And that was...
freaked me out. Totally freaked me out.
Yeah.
No, that was I think that was session 1.
Right.
Where we went, like, you laid some shit. It was just nonstop. And I remember I went home and I just started writing it all down because my memory is terrible.
Like the rest of us.
Well, no, mine's pretty bad.
Yeah.
This point is, and I think you gave me probably some homework and shit to because I was struggling to find even the any affirmatives in it.
Right.
Initially.
Right.
But
most people do, by the way, because we're actually programmed and socialized to think prohibitively, and not to disparage any, let's say, religious orientation or monotheistic religion, but think about the Old Testament and Christian theology, for example. I mean, it's all about prohibitive thinking. Thou shalt not. So to be successful, you should not do this, 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 and this. Then you get to the New Testament and it's a completely different language. I think, honestly, I'm not a biblical scholar. I don't play one on TV. I don't aspire to be one, but I think that much of the New Testament is an example of affirmative thinking in a way, right? But my point is, the agents of socialization, our teachers, our coaches, our parents, or whatever, they train us to think in terms of what you don't want to happen. Don't be that guy. Don't do this in life, right?
Don't do this, and if you do, there's punishment.
There's punishment, there's consequence, and then
Yeah.
from there's what? There's shame,
Yeah.
there's guilt, and there's fear. And when we operate from a place of fear, we damage our self-esteem. When we operate from a place of fear, we have artificial restraint upon us that prevents us from being our authentic selves and becoming whatever it is that we want to become.
Yeah.
It's anti-freedom, actually, prohibitive thinking is. I think about one of my favorite quotes from Abraham Lincoln when he was talking about what freedom is. And he said, freedom is to be unencumbered by artificial restraint. There is no greater artificial restraint than fear. And the originator of fear is prohibitive thinking. And that's why in the first meeting we have, or in the first session I have with psychotherapy clients, and I talk so much about we have to do the heavy lifting. We were talking about it's not about how you feel, it's about how you think. Because how you feel is a consequence of your thinking, right? Feelings are real, feelings matter, feelings are not facts. And feelings, our affective state, come from what happens when we think and believe as we do, because that thinking and those beliefs influence our communication, influence our behavior, and therefore affect patterns of interaction. When those things produce negative results or conflict, we then feel like shit. We feel lost, confused, angry, stressed, frustrated, sad, all the things, right? So if we come in saying, well, I feel all these things, I say, okay, I respect that, I get that. Now let's talk about how you're thinking. And when we start with prohibitive affirmative thinking, that's one of the very first steps towards pattern disruption, which is the hardest thing for human beings to do. It's why therapy exists, why consulting exists, to help people disrupt patterns. And when our thinking changes, our behavior and communication can change. And then that affects how we feel. We feel better.
Well, and for me, one of the biggest things that I felt was I had such a lack of confidence,
Mm,
and always sort of operating in that place of shame and or like just being unconfident, right? Once I had something to do, once I had something to put some energy into, a different way of thinking, a different way to behave,
right,
that had a positive focus and outcome,
right.
that made all the difference in the world for how I felt about myself.
Yes.
1000%.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it interesting if we go back to family of origin, and I keep talking about agents of socialization, being really sort of nerdy about that, but it's what they call it. When we feel sufficiently bad, when we express a sufficient amount of regret or remorse, we then get rewarded. Good job. You are doing a good job because now you feel like an asshole. And that's what I want you to feel like. I want you to feel like an asshole for making this mistake.
It's your punishment.
That's your punishment, right? And that's how we become good. It's so fucked up when you think about it that way, right? Because in psychology, we talk about, listen, let's not reinforce what we don't want to see repeated, and let us reinforce what we do want to see repeated. And the accidental problem here is we end up reinforcing and therefore rewarding prohibitive thinking, which is the nexus or the core of so much of this conflict and fear, right? So when you remove that and we do affirmative thinking and we start making proposals, we start communicating and interacting from that place of thought, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting to ask, to learn from you. I think people would want to know, how did...
Would they?
I think so.
Good.
You're a pretty compelling guy, I think. Yeah. How did affirmative thinking change your why?
Shit. I mean, well, it flips it on its ass, right? I mean, it's one thing to, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to know what you want to do, what you're pursuing, and putting all your energy into it, as opposed to being lost, sort of always just in this like lost middle ground of I feel like shit. I am a piece of shit. Right. You start to, for me, it was always taking this stuff on like, I am these things, as opposed to, I want to do these things and experience these things more, is a total fucking flipped paradigm.
It is a flip paradigm because it's confronting a lie. Because the last thing you have ever been is a piece of shit. The last thing you've ever been is that. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge that you felt that way. And I know that we've all been called that. I mean, I certainly have been called that by a few people. But that's not who I am. That's not who you are. But that can be how we feel.
Yeah.
So turning that completely around brings us closer to reality, right? Our why, if it's affirmative in nature, is more consistent with truth and reality and solution than it is with fear, problem, and disreality.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about polishing a turd here, right? This isn't pop psychology or positive psychology or Tony Robbins kind of stuff. I mean, if you're into that, cool, right? That's not what this is. This is about solution focused stuff, reality based stuff, and really thinking through these things. Because when you think through them and you get to the core and you get to the truth, you realize I had all this ass backwards and upside down and inside out.
Yeah.
Right? Every person is entitled, they have a right to know and to write their own rules. And we have a responsibility to know what those are if we enter into a relationship with somebody. You can't advocate for your needs. You can't make proposals for rules if you don't know what they are in the first place. And if you've been programmed to feel guilty about having them in the first place, then you're screwed before this thing even starts.
And I don't know that there's a sexier quality in a person, let alone a man, than somebody who's very in touch with what their rules are, what they want, what they don't want. And when you can communicate that,
Right.
It's shocking to typically the other person,
Yes.
because it's unfortunate, more rare than or more common, I should say, than we want to admit.
You're absolutely right about that. And I, on the therapy side of things, and sex therapy, do couples and sex therapy all the time. Like, it's one of my specialties. Across the board, irrespective of sexual orientation, and irrespective of whether it's male respondents or female respondents, consistently, the number one thing that both sexes find most attractive is confidence. Number one. It's one thing males and females have in common, regardless of sexual orientation. They're attracted to confidence. Well, what is confidence if not being empowered to stand in your truth, knowing what your rules are and having a framework and thinking tools and communication tools to advocate for those needs. You identify them, you advocate for them. That's the path to need fulfillment. If you can do that in any relationship, you have a superpower. And you are among the rare people who have this stuff and can do this. It's a game changer.
Yeah. No, it, you know, I think a lot of times when we talk about confidence, there's this misunderstanding or this thinking that we misclassify confidence as like some bullshit masculine thing where, you know, you talk about guy for men anyway.
Yep.
Or, you know, be more assertive or be more dominant.
Yeah, be alpha.
Alpha, right, there you go.
And by the way, if you're trying to be alpha, you're not. Okay, just letting you know. If your goal is to be out, anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I mean that's exactly my point. I mean, so when it came into time to sort of get back out there and start dating again, confidence wasn't anything that I had to try to do. It was just me having an understanding of what the fuck I want, what I don't want, and being able to communicate that. And total game changer.
Total game changer. And when we're congruent, you know, in psychology, we like to kind of come up with all kinds of fancy names to describe simple shit. So congruence is one of them, meaning an alignment, right? Between what you do, what you say, between what you think, what you feel. There's an alignment there. With healthy self-esteem, because we're not operating from a place of fear, because we're not dominated by our prohibitive thinking. And with honesty, these are my values. These are my rules, my needs, wants, desires, fantasies, preferences. I'm going to own that. And I'm going to be honest that it exists instead of ashamed that it exists. When you can then talk about that out loud and you have a framework within which to have those discussions, the path to need fulfillment is clear.
Mm-hmm.
And the recipient of those messages thinks that they're talking from someone from another planet because they haven't interacted with this probably ever before, especially in dating or really anything else.
Well, and it takes honesty to a next level because you're not just saying, you know, true things. You understand your truth, and you can you know how to communicate your truth, and that. You know, I think if we're going to talk about dating, you know, you're looking for a partner who can get to it. You know, you want someone who's healthy, who can sort of operate from a place of, I hate to say it, but just not bullshit. There's so much bullshit out there.
A cacophonous amount of bullshit. Yeah.
Excuse me?
Cacophonous.
Cacophonous?
Yeah. Huge amount.
Cacophonous amount.
Cacophonous peeps. Look it up.
Yeah. That means what?
An extraordinary amount.
Cacophonous. Okay.
Cacophonous.
Okay. You made me lose my train of thought on that one.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
No, you were talking about dating and the bullshit and the huge amounts of bullshit that was out there.
It was a cacophony?
We could go with that. Okay. An unbelievable amount of bullshit. Yeah. No, you're right. And I'm sorry I made you lose your train of thought. Makes me think about something we talked about and something I talk about a lot of time. You're talking about being authentic and standing in your truth and how that's the antidote to the cacophonous amount of bullshit in dating or the bullshit in any kind of relationship, right? And if you remember, and I always say this, never, ever, ever put your best foot forward, ever. Only put your authentic foot forward.
I remember the first time you told me that, I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. Because you hear that a lot, right?
Yeah.
And that's mostly, not to keep it on dating, but that's usually what the first few months at least are, right? Is this inauthentic, best foot forward, sort of fake thing.
Job interviews too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Lots of situations where we feel like we got to put our best foot forward, and that's a huge mistake right from the very beginning, because a lot of times putting your best foot forward is a behavioral consequence of prohibitive thinking anyway. Because a person says, well, if I'm myself, I'm not going to ever get this job. Or if I'm myself, she's going to fly out of the bathroom window in 5 minutes, right? There's that prohibitive thinking. But the problem with putting your best foot forward, there's really two of them. In the dating situation, let's stick with that one because somehow we're on that. It was a good one. The first problem is, if you put your best foot forward, then you have to maintain that all the time. Otherwise, the other person's going to say, wait a minute, what happened to the person that I was really digging or falling in love with? All of a sudden, you seem different. And by the way, I think that that's why after a few years of marriage, a lot of people say, in the very beginning, we had all this amazing stuff, but now here we are and we're miserable, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first problem, is you got to maintain it, your best foot. So if that's not authentic, good luck, because you're not going to be able to sustain it. But here's the other problem that most people don't think about. If you put your best foot forward and the other person falls in love with you, you never know if their love for you is real. You never know if you're safe, because in your mind, you're thinking, oh man, when the rest of me comes out, this isn't going to be good. It's going to go south. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So those two problems happen when you put your best foot forward. Whereas if you put your authentic foot forward and you're honest with yourself and you leverage that self-awareness and that relationship with self into relationship awareness, now you can have healthy self-esteem. You can be unapologetically confident without being arrogant, and you can be safe. Mm-hmm. Because if the other person accepts that, if the other person loves that, then you know that what you have is authentic and real, as opposed to some sort of production value sideshow that you've got to maintain.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like probably authentically broken or authentically in process is a better word, probably, is going to have a more attractive quality to it than seemingly perfect all the time.
100%. And
because I think you question that. You can't be this good all the time. You can't be this, right?
Right. Totally. Yeah. And then there's that confidence piece too. So best foot forward is trying to manufacture the production of confidence. Authentic foot forward is the display of real confidence. And real confidence doesn't mean that you've got everything figured out. In fact, I always say to people, in whatever field or what, if you think you know everything you need to know, it's time for you to retire and do something else, right? Same thing is true in your relationship with yourself or with romantic partners, dating sexual partners, business partners, whatever. You don't have to have all the answers in order to be confident. It takes confidence to say, I got no idea. No idea. But here's what I think. These are my values. This is what I advocate for, that kind of thing, right? That's the authentic confidence, the honesty, and quite frankly, the vulnerability, the comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah. That's real. That's honest. And certainly in the dating world, but in the business world and any other world, when you own that and you present that way, it helps you become successful.
Well, and even from an employer aspect, right? There's nothing more that is frustrating to me as having an employee who's just clearly bullshitting you,
right?
Trying to put their best foot forward, trying to appear like they have it all together, they know everything, while they just go out there and they're fucking up, and then they fuck up and they won't own it, or they get stuck in this loop of trying to appear to be one thing. Clearly, you can see right through that, and that actually, from an employer standpoint, you lose immense amount of confidence in that person,
right,
and their ability to perform or deliver or be what you hope. because it's clearly bullshit. Right?
That's 100% right. And trust then is breached.
Yeah.
Trust is lost, and the relationship is damaged.
Yeah.
Because now we're in the middle of a really big rule dispute. As an employer, your expectation is tell me the truth, right? And if you don't know something, tell me that so that we can remedy that, so we can train on it, so that we can get reps and practice on it, right? But if the other person trying to put their best foot forward says, yeah, I got this, because they're afraid of being vulnerable and being honest, then the unintended consequence of that is that it breaches trust, damages the relationship. And now you're in a heck of a position.
Yeah. Well, and it's probably even amplified when you flip it around as an employer,
Right.
to trying to, have this persona like, you know it all, you have it all together, you're never afraid, you never make mistakes, to openly make mistakes, openly work through those things. I mean, it's probably even amplified on that side because right, I mean, you lose trust in someone who has the responsibility to help you pay your bills. That's a scary place to be.
It's a very scary place to be. And then if you think about the other relationship that's in play there, which is the relationship with self, if you're lying to yourself, and that is facilitating this broken trust in the relationship with employee or employer, now you're loaded with self-doubt, and you're loaded with fear and angst and concern, right? And that is not an optimal place for either performance or for efficiency, right? Because you're constantly covering, you're constantly nervous. And then what happens? You become that person who you get that email or that call from the boss or the colleague and says, hey, can you stop by my office for a few minutes? And what happens? You're shitting yourself because you're waiting to get caught, right? Whereas if you put your authentic foot forward and you own your deficiencies, you own your limitations or your gaps in your knowledge, that makes you more trustworthy. It makes you more respectable, and it helps you feel safe.
And is probably one of the best ways to overcome loneliness.
Ooh, talk about that. That's a cool idea. I like that.
Well, so it's a pretty common saying, or I've heard it a lot anyway, that being owning a company is one of the loneliest places on the planet. Or like when you are in charge or you have the responsibility for something, if you cannot ever step into any type of authenticity, you're always trying to appear to have your shit together and be in complete control of all the situations. That means you can't talk about shit. That means you don't let people in to help you, which completely destroys any kind of team dynamic you're going to have.
Totally.
Right? Because you can't talk about what's really going on. And same thing with an employee, right? I mean, if you can't have teamwork if you are putting out this, bullshit persona of anything, when you can ask for help, when you can work together, that's all really, I mean, good fuck degrees and anything else. I mean, I think, and I think we're going to see this more and more as time goes, in workplaces where we are going to stop putting so much focus on a degree, and we are going to start looking for dynamics of where people can communicate authenticity and some of these types of communication skills that honestly, you and I have been talking about for years, made me a far better employer and team member with the folks that I work with, for sure.
Absolutely. And so let's reinforce the sequence here, that the point of origin for all of this is the choice between prohibitive thinking and affirmative thinking. Because affirmative thinking is the path to authentic foot forward. Authentic foot forward is the path to that honesty, that vulnerability, that realness, right? That promotes trust, promotes reliability, allows for transparency, and is a place where teams can gel, where leaders can be real and say, I don't have all the solutions, but I have a strategic vision, I have a mission, and I want to know what you guys think, and let's come together and solve this and work as a team, right?
Yeah.
That's the stream of success, right? If we go all the way back in that sequence, if we start from a place of prohibitive thinking, we are fucked from the beginning, right? Because our fears, the I don't want to, the I'm afraid of, when that's the thought process, well, now we got to put our best foot forward because we're afraid of being exposed. And then we put our best foot forward and we deceive. We create these impressions or these beliefs about us, or at least we think we do, in the minds of others. And then when you fail to deliver, you fail to execute, there's questions, there's doubt, there's confusion. And then when people figure that out, trust is broken. And the team isn't a team at all, right? So all of this starts from a choice. It's a choice between prohibitive thinking and affirmative thinking. Our prohibitive thinking is real. There's stuff that we don't want. There's stuff that we're afraid of, but you have to acknowledge that. Okay. Why don't you want to be your mother or father? What is it that you're afraid of admitting you don't know? Okay. Then intentionally move that to the affirmative side and replace that internal dialogue with, I want to, I aspire to. And so maybe it's, I aspire to be honest about the fact that I don't know certain things, but I'm ready and eager to learn. Because that immediately contributes to trust, transparency, and reliability. And it creates safety for you, whether you're an employer, an employee, on a team, working independently. Because now everybody knows what the deal is. And you can actually not be so alone in your struggle, because if you take on a role and there's something you're not particularly good at or something you don't know, and you put your authentic foot forward, but you own that and you're honest about that, then the team is going to step in and say, okay, here's how I can help. Here's what I know. And you can learn from them, and vice versa, right? And trust, unit cohesion, team cohesion is built that way, by being real, by being honest. And it all begins with the choice between prohibitive and affirmative thinking.
I often tell people that, well, to take a step back, my biggest pet peeve in life is ego, and people with just huge egos.
Right.
I typically say that that's the thing that I compete with in business anyway. Is it's not, it's really nothing other than the egos of people with any kind of decision-making ability. Tell me how that fits into what we're talking about.
What a great thing. It's funny how we all have our pet peeves. Ego is yours, one of your top one. Mine's hypocrisy.
Yeah.
They're similar to one another. I'll explain why. But I think the way that ego fits in is that ego tells you that you're in jeopardy if anyone sees your deficiencies, which is why you put your best foot forward so you can cover that, right? Ego is the presentation of unwarranted or false confidence in this sense, right? It's the belief that the best way for you to be successful and safe is to hide whatever kind of shortcomings or deficiencies you think, or that you're afraid that you have, or that you're afraid others are going to see in you. And that can come from a whole slew of other prohibitive thoughts, like I have to be perfect, I have to be competent, I have to be whatever. So then ego then becomes the projection of infallibility, right? I'm beyond reproach. There's nothing more that I can learn. I know everything that I need to know. And it's actually a request for false trust, right? Because you're coming across as this strong, competent, knowledgeable, whatever it is, and trying to persuade the other person that you don't need any help. You got it all figured out. And that's the antithesis of leadership,
Yeah.
but it's also the antithesis of being a good teammate, right? Because it's dishonest.
Yeah.
So I think in this context, ego understood that way, probably one of the biggest unintended consequences of adherence to prohibitive thought and the belief that you have to be dishonest to be liked, dishonest to be popular, dishonest to be hired. And the other problem with ego is that whatever ride or fulfillment you get from that is temporary and empty, because you're always waiting for the next shoe to drop, right? And so it creates anxiety inside the perpetrator of the ego, and it creates confusion for the recipient of the ego, I think.
That sounds like a pretty fucked up loop to get stuck in.
Oh,
If that's if your own ego is creating your own anxiety, and you're going to compensate for it with more,
right.
right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And we do that. It's called a second order problem in psychology, meaning our attempt at solution to solve one problem creates a whole other problem on a whole other dimension. And that's what it is. And it is a loop. It's a horrendous loop. And people get caught in it all the time.
Yeah.
Hypocrisy is similar to that. To me, that's my number one pet peeve. Because I always say, when there's a discrepancy between what is said and what is done, that is the biggest red flag that there is. Behavior is everything. So a person can talk from a place of ego or a place of prohibitive thinking or whatever, all they want. But behavior is everything. And so where there's a discrepancy between the two, focus on behavior. Because the problem is high ego people make us focus on words. And that if you're the employer of a high ego employee and you heard all these words, then you're sitting there befuddled because the behaviors that you're observing are completely inconsistent with the words that were expressed. And you're confused. And if someone is really good at the transmission of that ego, you may be reticent about confronting the idea that there's a discrepancy between the behavior and the words. So you wait. You give them a pass. Maybe you apologize for them or help facilitate making excuses for them. And you say, well, they're new. They'll get it together here in a little bit. And then it happens again. And it happens again. And it's a pattern. Well, now that confusion has led to frustration. That frustration leads to anger. And it's under those circumstances that now we're trying to have a conversation about why is it that what you do and what you say are so different from one another. And then if you have a person who experiences that reality-based confrontation as an ego assault, now they're going to be emotionally reactive and super intense. And now we're in a really difficult HR situation or, relationship management problem, because that is the strong ego person, now knows that they've been exposed and they have to mount an ego defense. And if it's ego that's involved, that defense is going to be vociferous, if not explosive, right? Or they're just going to completely withdraw and hide in the corner kind of thing. But either way, look how much damage occurs in the relationship and how much productivity, efficiency, team and unit cohesion is lost because of that dynamic.
We should do a whole session or either talk later or something about dealing with that, because I would love to explore that more.
Yeah, we should, and we will. I mean, that's a cool thing about the framework, and we should really emphasize this to our new viewers, all three of them, and hopefully that grows, right? But the thing about the framework is that our values are not in it, meaning yours and mine. It is a value-free framework. So what does that mean? It means once you learn the framework and all the elements in it, you plug your own values into it, right? That's really huge. And so, yeah, when we talk about how this works in employment business situations, when we talk about how this works for a person who wants to transform their body and be able to exercise regularly or change their relationship with food. We talk about this, a podcast about marriage and sex, or sex only, or marriage only, whatever. The framework allows everyone to take their own values and plug it in and have a mechanism to apply.
Hmm.
And then they can manage and mitigate conflict, prevent it, resolve it, because they understand it's a rule dispute, right? It's a rule dispute. So we should talk about, and we will, all these different issue areas for which the framework can be applied. Because if relationship is everything, and we think it is, there really isn't a situation where it can't be applied. And that's pretty empowering.
Yeah. And to both humans and, like you said before, right? Alcohol,
Yep.
cigarettes, working out, all these other. I'd never put any thought into my relationship with, going to the gym,
Yeah.
or that type of stuff. When you start looking at that, the empowerment that I got from looking at that changed everything for me. Because again, it took it off, and again, brought up the feelings that I had so deeply into me. I was like, oh, well, I'm just a piece of shit.
There it is.
Right.
Right.
And it took all of the focus off of my perceived deficits and put it into this. Well, I just need to work on this relationship. And then I had some affirmative sort of thoughts to go along with that. Fucking changes everything.
It changes everything. So now it's not about your personal failings.
Yeah.
It sure as shit is not about motivation. So many people, when they talk with me about this, whether it's professionally or personally, that one of the first places that they start is from a point of self admonishment, critique, and shame. And they say, well, I'm just not motivated. And trusting motivation is one of the biggest mistakes we can make, because motivation is so unbelievably fickle, right? It's not about motivation at all. It's about your relationship to the concept of it and the rules that govern it, right? And for working out, like so many other things, there's a lot of rules that are in play that we're not even aware of. But when we become aware of them and we do the inventory and we find the rules, then we can manage the relationship. And one of the first rules that many people find that they really didn't know was there is that the reason why they want to go to the gym is because they already think of themselves as a piece of shit.
A fat piece of shit.
A fat piece of shit. Or a lazy piece of shit, or whatever. And then when they can't sustain it for longer than 3 or 4 weeks, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It reinforces the prohibitive thinking, right? So when you look at the lies that form those rules and those prohibitive thoughts right from the beginning, and you speak truth to that, and you rewrite the rules, it is a game changer, because now it's not about shame and guilt and being a fat piece of shit or whatever. Now the affirmative thought is, I aspire to get to, a 500-pound deadlift or whatever. When I talk about getting into the gym, I talk about, let's select as an area of focus a performance focus, not a weight loss or a fat loss or even an aesthetics physique focus. Though all those things are helpful, they matter, right? But what's the path to it? If we focus on performance, then on a long enough timeline, the fat loss, the aesthetics, all that comes with it, right? But a focus on performance is affirmative in nature. It's doable, it's measurable, it's solution oriented. And by the way, folks, it is much more efficient in terms of being able to measure progress and success.
Sure.
Because if you're focusing on performance, you can see that within a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're focusing on fat loss or weight loss, or, you know, this picture of a physique that you think you're supposed to possess, that takes years.
Yeah.
Right. And so people get frustrated and they run out of energy, they run out of motivation, and then they stop. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So rewriting the rules of how all that works is the key. Here's another example. I love these articles in these magazines. Get J-Lo's physique. Here's 3 pages of her diet and exercise plan.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I'm old enough to remember all the bodybuilding magazines, right? Hawking all the supplements and all that other stuff. And, you know, they did, this is so-and-so's training split, and this is what they do, right? And so you think, because you're swayed by intelligent marketing, that if you do these things, you're going to look like this person. You're not, right? The truth is, you have to do the training to discover what you were designed to do, what you were designed to look like. J-Lo was designed to look like J-Lo. You can't look like her. I'm sorry to break it to you. You can't. You can look like your version of that. And just because the stuff that she's doing that's in People magazine works for her, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So quite frankly, if you're starting off going to the gym because you want to look like J-Lo or Brad Pitt or whoever the hell you want to look like, you're already starting from a place of prohibitive thinking. Because what's the prohibitive thought there? I don't want to be me. I hate me. That's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful, right? Whereas if the affirmative thought is, okay, I aspire to focus on performance gains because I'm really curious to see what I was built for, what I was designed for. I'm really curious to make that mind-body connection so that I can see the physique emerge from inside of me based upon the work that I'm doing. Well, now you've got something totally different than slogging away at the gym with your copy of the Men's Health or People magazine workout. And I don't mean to disparage that, especially Men's Health, because they do amazing stuff in their magazine. But I'm just saying, if you're trying to be someone else, then by definition, you're trying not to be yourself.
No.
And when asked, why are you here at the gym? A lot of people, if they're honest, they're saying, I don't want to be me. Really? Okay, well, let's see if we can go to the affirmative side and say, I want to become, evolve, grow into a healthier, more functional, better version of me. What about that? That's doable. That's measurable. It's authentic. It's honest. It's real. And it's fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
But the lies are so powerful, right? The lies tell us that we're not beautiful, that we're ugly, that we're fat, that we're disgusting, that we're this, that we're that. And what drives us to the gym is nothing but prohibitive thinking. And then you're confused about why you can't sustain that. Well, of course you can't. No one can. Because you can't ever become successful at not being something. So if you aspire to focus on performance, if you aspire to learn what you're designed to do, whether you believe that design is divine or whether you believe that design is evolutionary, it doesn't matter. It's about discovering what you're built to do. And that's exciting. And then you become a better version of you.
Mm-hmm.
That's real and that's honest. and it's sustainable, and it doesn't have a fucking thing to do with motivation at all.
You're preaching today.
Preach on, brother. You can tell we're passionate about this because we're both surviving, by the way.
Well, that's what so Dave and I, we go to the same gym. So he talked me into going to start seeing his personal trainer. And so the whole time you're talking about this, because I'm going through this as we speak.
Right.
And a lot of this, when you talk about performance and things, I'm still very much in the place of, fuck, I just need to survive this session,
Listen, for those of you out there, I'm still oftentimes there, but because what we're doing is not easy. Yeah. You want to talk about doing the heavy lifting. All right. Doing this kind of personal training at this kind of level it's hard. It's just hard.
And some of us don't use weights for the first couple of minutes. Talk about heavy lifting.
Yeah. Well, some of the heaviest lifting we can do is body weight.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Some of us more than others.
I mean, doing this on dips or pull-ups, mean, now you're talking about having to move 285 pounds, right?
Yeah.
So, no, it's hard, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
And nothing in this life worth doing is ever easy, ever. But going to the same gym, working with the same personal trainer who we're both convinced, I think, goes to his temple and designs damn near masochistic types of things.
Mm-hmm.
But he never puts you in a position where you can't do it. Meaning it's always safe, it's educated, it's very well experienced. But I think we talked about this when we did the first run on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we talk about the matter over mind issue as opposed to the mind over matter. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
No, you said he never puts you in a position where you can't do it. It's true, but my mind argues the fuck out of that.
Right.
About 9 minutes into working with him, where almost every time, like, I can't go anymore.
Right.
He's like, stop. Let's rest for fucking 90 seconds or whatever he gives you. And somehow you're able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those of you out there who are trying to work out, exercise, train, whatever it is you're doing, this is really why it's so useful if you can at all swing it to get a good trainer. There's a lot of bad trainers out there, just like there's a lot of bad business people, a lot of bad therapists. And we could talk about that maybe if we do a podcast on this, because I think this is another one where we could do a whole podcast on. But so let's assume that you find a good trainer. We can talk about how to do that. The trainer is the person who can take care of the programming, who can look at where you have strength imbalances and deficiencies and other things and design something to get you to where you want to be. And it's really important to be able to do that. But what we're also learning in this is that the mind is very easily deceived, especially by prohibitive thinking. Because what happens 9 minutes in? I can't do this. Fear. I don't want to. I'm afraid of, right? Afraid of failure, afraid of looking silly, of whatever, right? In the gym, when you're training, I think that's why I like to think of this initially as matter over mind, because once you take that rest and then you learn through experience that you actually can do it, your brain is surprised, And so in that way, your body is training your brain that your body can do so much more than your brain thinks that it can. Building that mind-body connection is about allowing sometimes matter over mind. I think it's deceiving to say it's mind over matter. I get it. But a lot of times the body teaches the brain what it can do. And a lot of other times the brain affects and tells the body what it can do. Making that connection is the most central component of doing this training. And you're focusing on performance instead of anything else. That's how that connection is facilitated, right? Because if you're sitting there thinking about how you're going to look with your shirt off or in a bikini, right? You're unavailable in that moment for maximizing this unbelievably hard work that you're doing in the gym. Whereas if you select as an area of focus exactly what you're trying to do with good form, with good tempo, with good technique, squeeze this, do that, whatever, and you're focusing on the performance side of it, all those other things that you really want, they take care of themselves on their own timeline.
Well, and I know, I mean, there's a lot of similarities in this conversation with the gym, but also with the framework where there was a number of times where you told me something and I had the same response that I had in the gym. Like,
I can't do it.
That's too much. I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember every time you did it, and this was a couple years in, and we were pretty deep into some things. I remembered telling myself, just fucking trust this guy. Just try it. Like, and there's this same exact mental struggle. I can't do it. I'm like, just fucking trust him. And every time I did, and every time, just like in the gym, it worked out. I was able to do it. It worked out, and I grew from it. You know?
I love that, and I thank you for that.
That was pretty good.
That was really good, by the way. That was really good. The only thing I would request is that you remove the word just from it, meaning you made an affirmative choice to trust, to realize that what we're doing here is testing hypotheses, and give yourself permission to be uncomfortable or to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because we were talking about doing things that were completely new and different. In other words, they were deviations from all the patterns that had been ingrained, that had been acquired over time, right? I always say, whether it's psychotherapy or consulting, the hardest thing for human beings to do is to disrupt patterns. That's why therapy exists, because we're there to help disrupt patterns of thinking, of perception, of behaving, of communicating, right? So how do you go about the process of doing that? Well, learning the thinking tool of prohibitive thinking, affirmative thinking is one really important part of that. Learning that all behavior is goal directed. We're all trying to accomplish something with the behaviors that we select. That's important because it helps us find our why, right? Trusting is making a decision that you're willing to be vulnerable, you're willing to be honest, and try something that's different from what you've done before. Remember, habit is behavior in the absence of thought. So if you want to change a habit, if you want to create a new habit, if you want to disrupt a pattern, you have to restore thought. If that thought is affirmative in nature rather than prohibitive, well, now we've really got something. So when you said, just trust it, right? What are you trusting? We're trusting that if you select a different area of focus, and I didn't select that area of focus for you, you did. It wasn't my values, right? It was yours. I just gave the technique, the thinking tools, the communication tools, the framework within which to put all this stuff. Then you made a choice, and that choice was to be affirmative, consistent with your values. I remember when talking about this training and working out thing, it was several years into our relationship or friendship, and it was like you said, I feel like I have really made huge progress in all these areas of my life, my romantic and personal relationships, my business relationships. And dude, you're just crushing everything. And one of the most impressive people I have ever worked with. And I mean that without a doubt. Because you did the work and you did the heavy lifting, and you came in open, you came in honest, you came in vulnerable, all the things, right? And he said, this is the one area where I can't feel like, I don't feel like I ever got a foothold. I don't make progress. And you attacked that with the same veracity, but the same techniques that made you successful when you applied these things in all the different areas of your life. And that's one of the things that's made you so successful with training. And look what it's done for your life. I mean, it's not just that you're regularly doing it, but we were what, 3 months in, you're like, my blood pressure is totally down. I'm sleeping better. I'm drinking more water. I'm eating better because I'm craving those things.
Mm-hmm.
And you were able to stop smoking.
81 days.
81 days. That's success.
Yeah.
It's so awesome. It's an inspiration to everyone.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
I think it is.
Okay.
And what did it have to do with motivation?
I see where you're going. I see what you're doing.
So what are we saying? Rules matter, right? Relationship is everything. Conflict in relationship is all about rule disputes, right? The rules that we adhere to that are written by other people, or the rules that we adhere to that are written by our own prohibitive thinking, the rules that other people have, all of those rules come into dispute. That's what conflict is. So conflict is no more and no less than a rule dispute. It makes me nuts. Just behind, I should say, hypocrisy. One of my humorous pet peeves is when a person says, I am afraid of conflict and I do everything I can to avoid it. And I say, I am so sorry to hear that. When they look at me like I'm crazy, which happens with alarming frequency, as I often joke, but then I say, look, conflict contains the potential for relationship enhancement. If you understand and conceptualize of conflict the way that we are, it's a rule dispute. That's an empowering moment, because if you're trying to change your relationship partner, good luck. It's not going to happen ever, right? But if you are trying to change the rules that govern that relationship, well, you can do that, and you can do that with your partner. Or you can do that internally when you're trying to change the rules that govern your relationship with working out or with eating or with cigarettes, whatever it is. When we know that conflict is a rule dispute, we're empowered to address the rule, to identify the rule or rules that are in place. From there, the only other piece of information that we need to know is what is the form of the rule dispute, right? So let's talk about, for just a moment, relationship with another creature that speaks English. Well, maybe not even English, like human to human, interpersonal stuff, right? Conflicts in relationships take one of four forms, okay? One, someone doesn't know what the rules are. Two, someone's not playing by the rules. Three, someone's unilaterally writing or rewriting the rules. And four, we have antagonistic rules. The definition of antagonistic rules in the framework here is that we have two rules, each one we kind of like, right? But the dilemma is, if we follow this rule, we automatically violate this rule. So the crass, funny, stupid example of that is, let's say you're in a romantic relationship and we have one rule over here that says we're always honest with one another. We have another rule over here that says we're always kind with one another. And then someone asks the question, does this shirt make me look fat, or does this dress make me look fat, or whatever? And then we're screwed, right? Because if we're honest, we might not necessarily be kind. If we're kind, we might not necessarily be honest. That's just an example of an antagonistic rule. Okay. So when you want to understand and manage conflict, you got to do two things. One, you got to identify the rule or the rules that are in play. And two, you have to find the form of the rule dispute. Because the rules, even though this concept is new to you, like it was new to you, they're still there, right? Just because the concept is new doesn't mean the rules are new. The rules have always been there. So it's a self-awareness piece, a relationship awareness piece, an honesty piece to inventory and find those rules. Once you found them, and once you understand what the form of the dispute is, you have everything that you need to know in order to mitigate, manage, and resolve conflict. Whether it's the conflict you have in your car about getting to the gym, or the conflict that you have with your spouse, or your significant other, or your boss, or whatever, right? So, in this framework, when you have that, and we're going to talk about this in a subsequent podcast, or maybe we should talk about it now, we then move to making proposals and enter into a negotiation, right? So again, words matter, definitions matter. What is a proposal? A proposal is needs advocacy. That's all it is, right? And we make rule proposals from an affirmative thinking point of view with as much precision and specificity as we can. So when we were talking about confidence earlier, if you have a sexual need, want, desire, fantasy, preference, and you're embarrassed that you're in possession of it, and you're afraid that your partner is going to think that you're strange or weird that you have it, and you therefore suppress it, and you never express a desire for it, and lo and behold, your partner doesn't do it, and now you're dissatisfied with your sexual relationship because you think your partner should know and should just automatically do that. Well, we've got conflict all over the place. And guess what? Big part of that reason that conflict is because of you, right? Because you didn't do your part, the part that you're responsible for in a relationship, which is A, identifying that you had that value, that you had that rule. B, having the courage to honestly make that a proposal and advocate for that need. And then C, enter into a negotiation with your partner to do need fulfillment. Okay. So let's talk about negotiation for a moment. What is it? It is not point counterpoint. It's not a debate, right? It's not tit for tat. Negotiation is a process where we realize through experience that once a proposal is made, the more that we're willing to accommodate the needs expressed by partner, the more we're simultaneously investing in getting our own needs met. That's what a negotiation is, because when we do that, we have a collaborative process rather than a competitive one, right? So let's say that a person makes a proposal that is precise and specific about a particular thing they want from a sex and eroticism point of view, right? Very first thing I do in couples and sex therapy, very first thing I do in relationship consulting is I look at the other person once we've got a proposal with precision and specificity, right? And I say, okay, what do you need or want from your partner in order to feel comfortable and confident accommodating that request? And that person answers that question with an equal amount of precision and specificity. And I say, okay. And then I go to the original proposal person. And I say, okay, here comes a proposal for your consideration. What do you want or need from your partner to feel comfortable and confident about accommodating their request? That's where that experience of accommodating requests becomes an investment in need fulfillment. And the outcome of that negotiation is a rule. And now we have a rule that we agree to play by that is reflective of the needs and the wants and the desires and the fantasies and the preferences of both people. As the architects of a relationship system, the vast majority of your rules, in fact, maybe the total majority, need to be authored by the occupants of that system and not anything else, right? Now, if there are rules written by other sources, family of origin, teachers, coaches, whatever, if we like them, if they're consistent with our values and the values of our relational partner, fine, let them be there. But they need to be reflective of the needs of both parties. That's how it becomes collaborative. All right. So if we talk about the relationship with self, because it's one thing to do this interpersonally with a relational partner, it's another thing to do with yourself. You made a proposal to yourself about training in the gym and exercise. Do you remember what the proposal was?
I made a proposal to myself about going to the gym.
Using affirmative thinking.
Tell me.
I aspire to go to the gym 3 days a week.
Yeah.
30 minutes per session, and do my best to do what the trainer asks me to do.
Yeah. There's a bunch of other things in it.
Speak to that.
Well, you already mentioned blood pressure, right? That was on it. And just overall, just, you'd mentioned earlier that this was sort of what I felt to be as one of the last sort of life domains, if you will, or something, of things to really address that I didn't really, I was pretty lacking in having my shit together with it. So I won't say that I was all of that affirmative when I started. However, there was a whole bunch of, I don't want to die early. I don't, right?
Yes.
I mean, I've since, and I still go there often, to be honest with you. I still do. My brain just does it still.
Habit,
right? Yeah.
pattern,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm so impressed with your honesty about that. And it's important we talk about this. Prohibitive thinking is seductive. It lures us back in because that's the pattern that most of us are trained and socialized to think in. And it's really difficult to disrupt that pattern. So the idea here is your prohibitive thinking is going to happen, right? What we really want to do is be able to acknowledge it when it does, recognize it when it emerges, and then take that very crucial second step and be intentional about moving it to the affirmative side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to say, I'm afraid of the consequences of high blood pressure for my health. That's real. It's a real fear. Going to the doctor and having your blood pressure taken and being afraid of what they're going to say about your cardiac health and your longevity and all that, that matters. That's real, right? But if that's our only area of focus, then it becomes a problem without end, right? So the affirmative proposal is I aspire to commit to regular training because of my belief that doing so will reduce my blood pressure. That's a completely different area of focus. And where the mind goes, the ass follows. So instead of ruminating on the couch, eating a Hot Pocket about your blood pressure, you're getting your ass up in the morning, which is unbelievably impressive, and going first thing to the gym and doing something really hard and uncomfortable, but valuable. And now your affirmative thinking is driving your behavior. And what's the result? One of them, your blood pressure comes down a lot.
Yeah.
That's how that works.
Well, and it's right. I mean, and that came directly out of, right, sitting around, sitting on my porch, drinking 4 beers, smoking 10 cigarettes, thinking about how unhealthy I am.
Yeah.
Which, right.
Yeah.
And that was the habit. That was the cycle or the scenario, where a lot of it started.
Yeah.
Which that's a fucked up loop to be in. Because then you just drink another beer and smoke another cigarette.
Right.
Because
you're coping with something scary and real.
Yeah.
Man, I had a different but similar thing that started, all of this, like, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years ago. It was blood work. Your cholesterol is here, your blood pressure is here, and I'm thinking maybe we need to do a calcium test to make sure that you're, not in jeopardy of a heart attack. And at that time, talk about being incongruent. I mean, here I am working as a therapist and as a consultant, and we're talking about self-care and all these things. And what am I doing? Well, I had at that time opened that practice for someone else. And there's a lot of stress. I'm working with patients, I'm working with clients in consulting. I'm a clinical director and managing all that, trying to manage a relationship. And I'm coming home at 8, 9 o'clock at night. I'm exhausted. So what do? I take a frozen pizza, I put it in the oven, I cook that thing up, throw that whole thing down, and I'm hungry like 3 hours later, right? And that's the cycle. And I'm nowhere near a gym. I'm not even sure I drove by one as I was, and you get in that pattern, you get in that cycle. So then the idea is, well, I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack. And I don't like that I feel like a fat ass or have no energy or, I'm really down on myself, all that stuff. If that is what I'm trying to use as the motivation to change my body, to change my lifestyle, to change my relationship with food, well, good luck. It's never going to work, right? But I had to make proposals, just like you did, to rewrite those rules.
Yeah.
The rules that govern my relationship with eating, the rules that govern my relationship with fear, with health, and then with working out.
Yeah.
So that cycle is real for all of us. And I don't want anyone to think that just because we're talking about this, that we've fully conquered all that, because no, we're in the fight every day. We all are.
Yeah.
It's a fight, but it's a beautiful fight, right? And now through this podcast and what we're going to be talking about, you're going to be equipped with tools, with a framework within which to work so that you can win that fight. Because people out there are suffering and they're struggling, and they try to do the right things, right? They try to find a therapist, and then the only thing that happens is they talk about their feelings. Or I've heard so many situations where therapists are talking about themselves and their own situation in therapy. Well, if you want that, that's not who we are. Let's just put it that way, right? We take a very different approach. But the point is, these struggles, they're there every day. The battle is there every day with fear, with self-esteem, with confidence, all of these relationships that we have, they contain conflict. And if we're not equipped with how to manage conflict and resolve it, if we're afraid of conflict and we avoid it, then conflict does us instead of us doing conflict. And what you and I are doing when we go to the gym, or we make that decision to eat something different than the frozen pizza
Than the
or
good stuff.
then the good stuff, that's us playing by new rules that are consistent with our values. No longer operating from a place of fear, but operating from a place of strength, from a place of truth, from a place of reality. We had to acknowledge the blood pressure. That's real and that's scary. And that's what prevents men from showing up to the doctor's office in the first place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm too scared of hearing what the truth is. Right? And they're following that rule, the avoidance rule, the pretend rule, the I'm invincible rule. Right? Well, good luck with that. Yeah. So you made a proposal, then you enter into a negotiation with yourself, right? Because it's one thing to show up the first time, it's another thing to keep going. What area of focus did you select? What negotiation did you go through that has allowed you, by the way, to successfully be consistent in doing this for now, what, 4 months?
Yeah, I think so.
That's awesome.
Right, about 4 months.
So how do you explain your success?
Well, I will say, having someone, it's very difficult, I think, to make a lot of these changes isolated and alone. So having someone, even finding Travis, the trainer, and I don't talk to him much, but it's another. I'm gonna kick his ass in golf on Saturday. But having some type of relationship, sometimes I don't even want to call it necessarily accountability, but like support, encouragement,
Right.
somebody that can speak to that. Honestly, it was probably the biggest thing.
Right.
And needing to be able to lean into that, and be constantly reminded of, because you're pretty good at calling me out on shit that comes out of my mouth when it is still so frequently prohibitive, right?
And vice versa.
And it's so that's been very helpful. So that the on a logistic front, anyway. But my own internal, I think, negotiation was, look, I can stay stuck in this place of actively continuing to harm myself, or I can flip it around. I know exactly what to do. Just fucking get off my ass and do it. And that it's really not that hard to keep going back when you start to see the mental changes that the physical changes and the blood pressure and things happen quick, but the mental changes that happened really did make that a lot easier.
Absolutely. And look at how honest you were with yourself. You understood that what you were doing was self-harm. You just said that. That's poignant, right?
Cigarettes and beers or alcohol is pretty self-harming.
Yeah. So is suppressing your needs and your emotions and your thoughts. There's all kinds of ways that we harm ourselves.
Yeah.
And yet we harm ourselves under the banner of what? Acquiescing in conflict to produce a false sense of harmony, or going into denial, or avoiding truth because we're scared, right? The antidote to that fear, to the stress that comes with it, is truth. Because once we're honest and we tell the truth, I'm harming myself, right? I'm afraid of blood pressure. I'm harming myself. Now we're acknowledging all those prohibitive thoughts. And now we can take the second step, move it to the affirmative side, find our why. And now with that new area of focus, because where the mind goes, the ass follows, behavior changes. And that commitment that it takes to do this is not now reliant upon transient motivation. And it sure as shit isn't motivated by fear. It's motivated by something completely different. And that's what makes it sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And when we sustain it, lo and behold, we feel good about ourselves. You're not going to see results of anything if you don't sustain it, right? But now you've got this momentum, and what do you have? A new habit, a new pattern. Now, I mean, every Wednesday, I wake up in the morning just pissed because I got to endure a leg day.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrendous, right? I continue to try and change my relationship with leg day, and I'm struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, every time I face it, every time I do it, I walk out of there and I say, okay, I won that decision. I won that moment.
Oh.
And you string together those wins. And even when you still struggle, like I do, like you do, the struggle, as they say, is real, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to get up to a place where you never have prohibitive thinking. That's not the point. Prohibitive thinking is going to happen. The real point is, what do you do with it once you acknowledge it? And can you acknowledge it in the first place? Because it's powerful, it's seductive, and it is the biggest source of self-harm there is. Prohibitive thinking. It's why people take extreme measures the other way. You were going to say something.
No, you're not. I'm just going to say that when you really get stuck in a lot of prohibitive thinking, it's really easy to become the victim.
Yes.
And that's a cycle that is the bitch.
Absolutely.
Right? Which then it permeates, and then, but it's actually an easy one to get out of if you can when you do actually understand it and can flip your self-talk into something of positive, right? I'm going to intentionally harm myself right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different than shit, I'm gonna die early.
Mm-hmm. Very.
When you say I'm intentionally fucking doing this right now.
Right.
Well, I'm not a victim. I'm fucking making just fucked up decisions.
Right. And when you're flipping it, as you're saying, you're not spinning, you're not polishing a turd. This isn't semantics. You're selecting a different area of focus.
Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, selecting an area of focus that by definition is solution focused, because it's doable, measurable, observable, and therefore it exists in reality.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas when you're doing prohibitive thinking, you exit reality. I mean, Elvis has up and left the building, right? Because you're trying, you think, to accomplish something that cannot ever be demonstrably accomplished. You can never be successful at not becoming something. You just can't, right? That's problem focused. It's exiting reality, and it keeps us married to the problem. And the longer we stay there, we can feel victimized or take on that victim mentality. And what flourishes over there? Depression, anxiety, the inability to work through trauma, right? All of that heavy, horrid shit that so many people struggle with, right? The path out of that begins with making a choice to select affirmative thinking. That is not the power of positive thinking. It has positive results,
Mm-hmm.
which is why you may hear us talk about it as positive. But again, this isn't a Jack Handy moment where, I'm smart enough, I'm good. It's not that. It's not polishing a turd. It's not making lemonade out of lemons. It's the choice to be real, the choice to be honest and say, okay, I'm acknowledging that internal dialogue that's telling me I don't want to, I'm afraid of, because that shit is real.
Mm-hmm.
And then being intentional about moving it intelligently, strategically, using your brain to the affirmative side. That skill is the most important first step for any person on a journey of suffering, of confusion. There's all kinds of ways to treat depression, anxiety, trauma, and all of them have value in one way or the other. Not everything is good for every person, right? But everybody, irrespective of your history, of your circumstances, everybody can benefit from this thinking tool. And this is one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, because it happens over and over and over. And when you get good at the skill of intentionally selecting an affirmative thought, it changes the game.
Yep.
Totally changes the game.
Yep.
And by the way, you entered into a negotiation in the relationship with Travis. That's where the negotiation really occurred, in addition to with yourself. Because to your point, that supportive relationship, which is the outcome of a negotiation, that one a professional, trainer client,
mm-hmm.
it concretized and established rules for living. Because now the rule is you train 3 days a week. And the presence of that rule has written and unfolded a bunch of others, like how you're sleeping, what foods your body's craving and what you're deciding to eat, how much water you're drinking. You rewrote all those rules in a matter of months.
And I did that.
Yeah, he did.
It very much, there were steps to it. And right. And to your point, from the mindset and the thinking behind it, first step. Second one, finding some help and some people to go through it with me.
Right.
And because, right, it's sometimes you just need somebody to be like, shut the fuck up and go already.
Right. And that, by the way, is a rule that you have.
Yeah.
That's a need that you have.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe a person needs that, maybe they don't. What matters is knowing what you need and not being afraid to own it and say it. Because if you know that you need that supportive person who says, suck it up, buttercup, let's go, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's what works for you, then you can say that to Travis, or you say that to me, or whatever, and we can deliver on that, and you can do need fulfillment. Why? Because you did needs advocacy. Now, how the hell did you do needs advocacy? You did needs identification. And you did that from a place of truth and honesty and vulnerability. Okay. So I think last thing for the podcast for tonight, let's give everybody the elements of the framework. We're going to talk about a communication tool, because we've talked about our why a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So here's where we talk about why, what, communication. This is a big one. Cool. Especially when we start talking about proposals and negotiations, and we'll talk about how those actually happen in subsequent podcasts. By the way, there's articles on the website about all this stuff if you want some more detail. We'll put a link in the podcast for you to take a look at that. All right, so what is why, what communication? And this is something that is also a first step thing, right? Okay. All the time, when we do communication, we usually only do what communication. And what we really want to do is say our why before our what. Our why is our motivation, our intent for what we're saying. And it's attached to a psychological principle, which is, I said it earlier, all behavior is goal directed, right? We're all trying to accomplish something with the behaviors we choose. Communication is a form of behavior. So it's imperative that we're explicit and direct about our why before we say our what. When I introduce this communication tool in therapy and in consulting, I use a silly example like I often do with everything. And I say, okay, imagine I'm with a good friend of mine, like I'm with Tyler, and the only thing that I do is what communication. And I say, hey man, your fly's down, right? So right then and there in that moment, left to your own devices, you have to make attributions or conclusions about why I just said that to you. But you could guess inaccurately. You could say of me in your head, that guy's always looking for a chance to make fun of me. Or you could say of me in your head, yeah, that guy, he's negative. He always finds what's wrong in any given situation. Or you could guess accurately and you could say, that's a good friend. He's looking out for me. But the point is, you have to guess. If instead I do why what communication and I do my why before my what, I would say it differently. I'd say, Tyler, brother, you're a really good friend of mine. I wouldn't want to walk around like this all day. Just let you know your fly's down. And in that moment, I framed the conversation. I reduced the probability of error of the recipient of the message making an attribution that was inaccurate, right? If you've ever been in a situation where you said, that's not what I meant, or you've been in a situation where someone said to you, that's not what I meant, that's evidence that the why is missing. Okay. So when you communicate with anyone, and including with yourself, do the why before the what. It makes communication so much more efficient, so much clearer, so much more effective. Sounds simple, right? Well, it is because it's elegant, but there's a complexity here. In order to do why what communication, it presumes that you know what the hell your why is in the first place. There's the self-awareness piece. That's why self-awareness is crucial for relationship awareness. You got to know your why. So I'm working with people in business, romantic, sex relationships, whatever it is, and we're doing why what communication. I say, here's the good news. You only have to get this right 50% of the time, right? Because if one of you does what only communication, the other person can say, okay, hang on, time out. What's your why? And what they're really wanting to know is, what are you trying to accomplish and why is that important to you? And if we can understand that those questions or that question, what is your why? It's not a provocation, right? It's a legitimate question. Then the original speaker can take a minute and think about what their why really is. And sometimes we don't know. And I always say, not only is that okay, that's good, because now we take a minute and we find it. We ask ourselves, okay, what is my why? What am I trying to accomplish right now? And why is that important to me? Because when I can effectively communicate that by saying that out loud, I can be understood. And sometimes we realize that our why isn't always righteous. That's a tough one. But if we're honest, we can acknowledge that and say, you know what? My why was I was trying to get even, or I was trying to score a point, or I was using passive aggressive communication because I'm really angry, right? Then we can get to the core of the matter and talk about what the rest of the why is, or the real why, right? So why what communication is essential. every person that comes to see me for couples and sex therapy, and every business client on the consulting side who comes for relationship stuff, whether it's individual, group, team dynamic, institutional level stuff, they talk about communication is their number one problem or their number one goal. It's always communication, right? In one form or another. So no matter what your situation is, no matter where you're struggling with communication, if the only thing you do, the only thing that you learn is why what communication, you're going to reduce the probability of conflict and misunderstanding and error simply by applying why what communication. And remember, to do why what, you got to know what your why is. And if you don't know what the other person's why is, ask, what is your why? Why is that important to you? What are you trying to accomplish? The answers to those two questions help us understand the why, right? So in our framework, for the framework podcast that sets the stage for talking about all kinds of other issues or related issues, we've got why what communication. That's our communication tool. We've got prohibitive and affirmative thinking. That's our thinking tool. And then in the framework, we have the ability to understand what the rules are, understand what form a rule dispute is taking, understanding that conflict in relationships is all about a rule dispute, no more and no less. We can then put all that together to make proposals that are affirmative nature and delivered in a why what format, and enter into negotiations to write new rules to make relationships function better. That's the essence, that's the core of the framework, and it is applied globally.
Love it.
Love it. So this is part one again of the first podcast. What do you think?
I think we did it. And I had your mic turned on this time, so I think everybody can hear you.
That helped.
Yeah.
We had the little power outage thing.
It was weird.
It was a little weird.
Glad I have the battery back up.
I am too, by the way. How smart is that? Why the hell is the power out?
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to plug your mic in, but I have a battery back up.
Yeah, no, I'm not smart enough for a lot of things.
Awesome.
Folks, we decided to be vulnerable and real and honest in doing this. We hope that you appreciate it. We're really excited about this because there are a lot of issue areas of great interest that we can apply all this to, that we're going to be getting into in subsequent podcasts. And for those of you who want the whole thing, which is awesome, you'll be able to find the whole thing on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. For those of you who want snippets or little nuggets, we're going to break those things out into shorter little pieces, and those are going to be on social media platforms. We've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got TikTok. The only thing we're not doing is Instagram. Just fine with me. I don't even know what the hell yeah. So lots of places to find us. We'll announce new podcasts on the website when they're scheduled, when they're coming up. And hopefully we'll start getting some questions from people wanting to know how to apply it here, how to apply it there. What do we think about this or that? What is the ultimate goal here? We want to have a grand conversation. We want to invite people to sit at the table and have a discussion with us about real shit. Mental health stuff, relationship stuff, work stuff, all the things. For those of you who can't afford therapy, or for those of you who haven't found a therapist that's a good fit for you, or for those of you who don't do consulting, whatever it is, we're hoping that this empowers you, that this gives you tools, and we encourage you to participate in this grand conversation that we're wanting to facilitate and create. So thank you, brother, for your time in this unbelievable studio that we got.
Yeah, no, appreciate you.
It actually looks like we know what the hell we're doing.
Glad to be a part of it.
Oh, that's my line. I'm just glad to be a part of this with you.
Oh, okay.
It's the truth, Ruth.
Oh, okay.
All right. So is it Miller time?
Miller time.
And a food, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do it. All right.
Yeah.
Have a good night, everybody.